That's it. Welcome to Porch Play Chats, sponsored by the American Association for Promoting the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately named IPA-USA. IPA-USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association. As part of our efforts to promote play, we're happy to introduce our Porch Play Chats. These are conversations that focus on a wide range of topics from experts that are just as passionate about play as we are. You can find the latest Porch Play Chats and learn more about IPA USA by visiting our website, ipausa.org. Click on that top right-hand corner, and that gets you access to our Facebook page, our Instagram account, and our YouTube channel. That's where these Porch Play Chats will be housed. They're released once a week on both the YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. And of course, you can find the live links on our website. I'm Deb Lawrence, president of IPA USA. And with me on the porch is Lisa Murphy. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us again.
And joining us today is Megan Dickerson. Megan is the director of exhibitions at the New Children's Museum, a contemporary art museum for children, which I really have to come visit in San Diego, as well as an independent artist organizer working with communities to instigate more equitable, so important these days, and playable public spaces. She's the author of a chapter in the book Practice-Based Research in Children's Play, and what she's going to talk to us today about, which no one has yet, so we're so excited to have you, is Playwork as Unlearning. So my question to you, Megan, what is Playwork and how is Playwork different from other ways we might engage with young children?
Well, I should start off by saying I wouldn't call myself a Playwork expert because I don't know if anybody really is, right? It's this constant learning, constant changing, right? And it's something that when I discovered it, it felt really intuitive to me. It felt like, that this is just how I organized my thinking, but I also had to make some big shifts. So Playwork is a way of engaging with children that is not directive. It's almost like you're just this third category of adult in kids' lives. You're not a parent, you're not a teacher, you're just this person who's really invested in you, but is not going to try to push you in one direction or another. So people are often more familiar with Playwork through adventure playgrounds. So people know adventure playgrounds, junk playgrounds, starting in the UK, moving throughout the world, several in the United States. And the people who work on adventure playgrounds are called playworkers. So it's a non-interventionist way of working with kids that's really, really hard to explain unless you see it. Lisa, you're nodding your head because you know how this works, right? And so for me, I discovered it through Morgan Lecter-Saxby and Susanna Law of Pop-Up Adventure Play, who started doing this work in the United States really early on. And I learned about it through a friend when I was working at Boston Children's Museum, started to look further into it, and then found out that there was a program at the University of Gloucestershire in Play and Playwork, where you could do, from where I was in Boston at the time, I could study with Stuart Lester and Wendy Russell to learn more about what this Playwork thing is. So that's kind of how I got started in it and why I don't call myself an expert, even though I've been doing it for nearly 10 years now. Because it's that unlearning, right? You have to think about how your relationship with children, how do you think about children, and play as learning is a really complicated thing in Playwork, right? So yeah, just to get started there, what kind of questions do you have?
Oh, so many. So in the Children's Museum, the New Children's Museum, how does Playwork happen?
That is a really good question.
Yeah.
I know the exact look on your face is like the look on my face most of the time. You're like, how do we do this, right? So I started introducing Playwork in 2014. I'm in exhibitions, so that's my primary role. And what had happened was the person who was overseeing the frontline staff the people who work directly with visitors at my museum, she had moved on to another role. And so someone needed to take over supervision of what were then called the museum guides. And so, of course, I had this passion for Playwork, and I thought, let's just see what happens if we start to introduce this little by little. And I did a presentation at US Play Coalition like shortly after I started introducing this. And about halfway through the presentation, I just made the screen go dark because I said 6 months later, the entire staff quit. Almost all of the museum guides quit because it was so difficult to transition from one role, which was more of a museum educator role, right? I want to be in the gallery and I want to engage with kids and families so I can tell them more about the amazing art that's at this museum and looking for the teachable moment. Right? That's how, you know, and I completely understood that because for so many years, that's what I was doing as a museum educator. I was looking for, you hear that one little thing where they use a certain word, right? And you think, oh, okay, I can talk about this. Oh, that actually is called a sphere, you know? Right? And what I realized through Playwork, that's often about my own ego. Because at the end of the day, I can say it was so amazing. I was able to teach this kid about spheres. And through Playwork, I saw at the end of the day, if I was practicing in that mode, it was, they did this amazing thing. I saw this kid make this connection and it had nothing to do with me, right? It wasn't about me. So that's what was so hard, I think, for the museum guides, because they were so used to, and they had art history backgrounds and they were incredibly knowledgeable. Right. And so one of them stayed and became sort of the transition into this new, we started rehiring and bringing people on. You know, a lot of the changes were really simple. So we used to have inflatable sculpture by artist group, Friends With You. And we would have, before I came into this role, there would be a staff member who would stand there and count people in. So they could regulate how many people were in the sculpture. It's, you know, kind of like a jumpy sculpture that you could go inside. And I said, let's try, what happens if we don't?
What happened?
Right?
What happened? What happened? What happened?
Right? And people thought there would be chaos. There, you know, there was a lot of pushback. Like, let's just try it for a week, see what happens. And what we saw was kids started to negotiate with each other. And they knew, they would look in and they'd say, I think there's too many people in there. I'm going to come back. They'd find other ways of interacting with the sculpture around the edges, right? So it just opened up this whole new way of being. But it was really hard because as you're standing there, my role used to be, oh, all right, 10 minutes, you know, it's up. Now the next group comes in and now you have to figure out how to improvise. And right. So we did a few things like that. We stopped resetting, which is a very typical children's museum thing. You take, after somebody's played through a space, you go and take, let's say it's a grocery store exhibit. If all the lemons are on the floor, you put the lemons back in the lemons bin. So we stopped doing that. We didn't have as many spaces that were as traditional as that. But, you know, if a car on this track was on the ground, we left it on the ground and just watched to see what would happen. And of course, if it's in the middle of a pathway and somebody's gonna whoop, slip, we would move it, right? So that's how I started to introduce risk-benefit assessment, right? What's the worst thing that could happen if this car stays in this place, right? Am I going to be seen as not doing my job, as not cleaning up, right? So a lot of what I did was talking to the caregivers. Here's what's happening. Here's a new approach that we're introducing. You know, here's what you might be able to expect. So that's in like a way long-winded answer to your question. Does Playwork happen at the Children's Museum? I think it happens more so with adults on the outskirts, right? Is that what you're going to say, Lisa?
Well, no, I was going to say, you mentioned specifically caregivers. So were you kind of like, we call it speaker phoning or sports casting for the potential, I'm guessing, family childcare providers or homeschooling groups that are coming through. So you're kind of to the air modeling what's in your brain. Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah, total. And I love that term sports casting, and I'm going to use it. That's so interesting because
I call it speakerphone. Like, here's the buttons, like I'm putting it all out there, but the formal proper word for it is sports casting, where I'm narrating what's going on
Totally. Yeah, no, that's a lot of the training that I would give to the play workers who then were renamed museum play workers after a long, should we be museum play workers? Are we really play workers? We did museum play workers because it was an adaptation. But a lot of it is just talking to a caregiver, and that's a lot of parents for the most part, unlike an adventure playground where there might be just children and the play workers and it's this safe zone, right? We always have caregivers. You're not allowed to come as a kid without a caregiver or teacher or parent, nanny, whoever.
Nor are you allowed to come as an adult without a child, but that's another conversation.
Right. Well, at our museum, we do allow it as long as we just make it clear.
You have to be escorted.
We don't. Oh. Yeah, I know. It's been a big point of contention, but I've always pushed for it because adults need to be able, we're an art museum. We're an art museum and a children's museum. And so we'll say, hey, Megan is visiting. She's going to be wearing this tag. When you see her, if you want to let, visitors know who she is, right? It's more complicated. There's like a whole gender issue if it's a single man versus a single woman walking through, but, and then we can just do that. I guess we're also doing our speaker phoning, hey, just so you know, this is a person who's coming, who's visiting. He is a researcher from blank, right?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'm loving that because, and this is sidebar totally to our conversation today, but before COVID, I mean, that was my job. I was traveling around the world doing training seminars for early childhood people. And I would always look for the Children's Museum. And I'm walking in, this middle-aged woman by herself, and I would be escorted. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, no disrespect, but I'm looking to have an experience here. And now I'm feeling like I shouldn't be here. Like I'm being judged, and like I can't really allow myself to be engaged in what's happening here because I've got, a docent here with me. And so I really do, sidebar, want to acknowledge that you have found, I think, a middle ground that is still respectful for everybody involved. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, you're welcome. You're welcome. I think so. I've seen it work well where they've really developed a program in a museum where they're going to have a staff member who shows you through, and it's really, they're excited about it, and it's not this protective layer, but it's, let me show you something I really love.
Yeah, that's not what I've gotten. Right? I've got like this chick standing there with her arms crossed, waiting for me to be done interacting with this exhibit. And I'm like, you know what? How about I just go get some lunch?
Yeah, no, I think that, imagine if you met me and they said, hey, Megan's going to assist you, going through, it's very different than, I had a really great experience in Tacoma at the Children's Museum there with one of their staff members who was, frontline staff member that they assigned to us, but she was just so excited about her work, and it made we understood the work of the museum better when we left, and all that stuff. But
that's right.
Megan, I have a question about when you rehired.
Yeah.
So when you rehired, did you rehire people who had an art history background, or did you rehire people with an education background? Or because you can teach somebody some things, but can you teach them this mind shift?
Megan flew to Wales. Megan flew to the UK. She cherry picked the current crop of Playwork graduates.
Budget is tremendous. Yeah, I found the best of the best. Well, we were really lucky because I found that working with artists is more fruitful ground. It's a lot harder to teach an early childhood educator who's been schooled for years in a certain way of thinking about children. It's harder to get that unlearning in place than it is sometimes with artists who are really excited about art and kids, right? So we got really lucky, and I will totally name drop her. Katherine Aitken was, I think, a recent graduate at the time from UC Santa Cruz, and she'd studied art, but she was just curious, and her dad, Stuart Aitken, is a researcher, and one of his early experiences was actually working at a children's museum in Canada and doing some research there. He works in children's geographies, and so she just had this curiosity about it, and she came in and she just intuitively knew to mirror, or to parallel play, and sit alongside a kid nearby and just do what they're doing, and so she didn't have to use words necessarily. She was just brilliant at it. So I'm looking at her like, you are a much better play worker than I am, and you're coming in with very little training, right? So she became the mentor to more staff that came in. So after that, Susie was still there. Susie was one of the original museum guides, and she stuck on. So she kind of knew the history of it. So she kind of kept us honest, of like this transition. Igari Yatiaga was another hire. She was an actor, artist, had performed since she was 3 with her parents' theater troupe called Teatro Iscali, and she was amazing. Loves Star Wars, would connect with kids around that, and so little by little, Hannah Michael came in. Was also through UC Santa Cruz. UC Santa Cruz, good place to recruit play workers. But and there's many more people who were involved with us at this moment. But we just got some people who were who'd worked as aides to children with language-based learning difficulties, a real range. And so together we were figuring out what this thing was going to be. And that was really important because we set our ground rules. We created a manifesto, which I can share and we can link to it too. What do we want to do? What don't we want to do? We believe, we condemn, right?
Which I think might be really helpful for other children's museums, right? So we have a wonderful children's museum in Philadelphia, right? It's a beautiful children's museum, which my grandchildren and I frequent when we aren't engaged in COVID. And it's so fun because, as an early childhood educator, I follow their lead. So if we have more than 2, my husband goes with one, I go with the other, and we never see each other for, 3 hours while they're exploring. But one of the things I sometimes see is parents trying to get their child to do something, and the museum person who is there unsure how to help that parent sort of take a step back. And so I'm curious about that too, because sometimes even in the grocery store, I feel like I'm having to ask a question to a parent. Oh, I wonder why he's touching all those apples. Do you think he wants to feel what it feels like? I bet has he ever smelled an apple before?
You just like launch in like Mary Poppins. You're like,
I do. My ex-husband, I'm married, this is my second marriage, but my ex-husband would not let me go to the grocery store with him anymore because he said, you've got to stop following people around.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an empathy for the experience of the child. And I think, we talk about our model, even in developing installations. I haven't talked, so we commission artists to create installations for children. So our whole model, we hire artists to work in the museum as play workers and as teaching artists, but then we also are commissioning artists to create these immersive installations. And so we start with the playing child. So what does the playing child want to do? What are we observing? What are we missing in the ecosystem of this museum? So are there places where they need something that's more kinetic or more climbing? Are we seeing kids climbing on furniture? Well, that might be a good place to put something to, climb on, right? And then we think about the supporting adult. And then we think about these bigger, broader community issues. And it seems counterintuitive because many museums will start with the big issue, right? This is what's important. How do we connect with teachers? Like what are teachers, how does this connect with the state frameworks? And then we think, how do we make this interesting for kids? And I care about big issues a lot. I think that there are things that museums can be putting at the forefront that are important, particularly around race and ethnicity and culture. But starting with the playing child has meant for me that we get to these bigger things. So with us, we're making it more intuitive so that it's not, in other children's museums, I think that there is a way of doing things. You're supposed to do this, right? This is an exhibit where we're learning about blank, right? So you as an adult caring for children feel like, okay, what's my responsibility in here? I'm supposed to be teaching about blank. So they're looking for the teachable moment. And that's usually, I think, how people model. So, with us, a board member of the museum who I just adore, Ed Gillison, he started coming with his kids. And he said that by watching the Playworkers, he learned how to engage with his kids in a very different way that he didn't see was possible. And, or, maybe he just didn't think of, right? The kinds of questions they would ask, or not try to push them, or not try to get them into an activity. And so I think I go back and forth. Can Playwork happen at a children's museum? It's really hard, really, really hard. But I think the benefit of those caregivers who see their children in a different light, those teachers who see the kid that's a problem in the classroom, excelling and coming up with these, like working with, like Yadi was so great in just, like, she was quiet. You think that, like an actor, you think that she'd be, but she was very quiet and she would just really listen. And I think that kids aren't used to really, really being listened to, So yeah, it's a constant battle, I think, to try to advocate for, what is it, that book, it was like The Art of Doing Nothing that came out, right? Jeremiah Dockeray, who runs Eureka Villa, he was doing kind of a book club about this. But Eureka Villa is an adventure playground in California, and like that's just so important. We don't know how to do nothing, and I think in children's museums we're so used to doing something. So just being able to relax and be like, okay, doesn't matter. If a kid wants to go into the Wonder Sound and just be quiet and just sit, you can do that. Right? There's not a lot of places at children's museums where kids can just sit.
Where they can just be.
Yes.
And I think that that's always been a struggle with especially teachers of young children, early childhood people, caregivers, whatever language you're most comfortable using, is that we don't feel like we're doing anything. So we're already in a profession that's not inherently valued or respected. And now I'm like, when even though I know in my heart, I'm doing exactly what I need to be doing. Keep going. You had to go.
No. I my heart sees your heart. It's, and I think this gets into some bigger issues, right? So, how do you have to work to make your value known? And how we undervalue early childhood educators through pay. And in children's museums, entry-level museum staff make minimum wage typically. Some museums do better, but they're doing this really hard work. And I feel like I want to constantly advocate for that, because I started off on the front line of a museum, and I had parents who were very supportive of that. I volunteered in children's museums when I was in high school, but right now, all those levels, I'm talking about levels of privilege. I could volunteer in a museum in high school. I didn't have to have a job, right? I didn't have to have paid work, and that just led into my experience there. So I don't know how, and I would love, maybe this is a big IPA question, right? But, how do you value just being, right? Like what I would say, Jill Grant, another amazing play worker at the museum, who's an artist and just transformative for the practice of the museum. She would say, as she was mentoring, because we started up this chain of mentoring. So Katherine mentored, then Yadi, and it just went down the line. And she would say, your job is to be present. Your job isn't to look busy. Your job is to be present. And that's so hard, and it's exhausting. It's so exhausting. And nobody who doesn't do it, right, understands what that feels like, to just sit there and take deep breaths and look at, I think it's the Carl Rogers thing, but with no memory and no desire. Observe with no memory and no desire. I'm not going to try to make you do the things that I think I would have done as a kid. I'm not going to make you do what I think is appropriate in this moment. I'm just going to be with you and just be wide-eyed, right? It's so hard.
Megan, it is hard. And I think that is probably
I need to interrupt.
no, my turn.
It's not that hard.
No,
We
it
make
isn't that
it
hard. Yeah, we
Yeah,
make it hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think when we
It's
tell
my
teachers to just, it's my turn. when we tell teachers to be present,
Mhm.
I feel like they feel like they're not doing their jobs, as Lisa talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And so it's an unlearning. It's one of those, there's many unlearnings that we have to do because of our own experiences or of what we feel like we have to do because we want to be seen as a teacher.
Mhm.
That if you Lisa has I'm going to steal the play is enough. I
It
love that.
totally is enough.
Yeah.
Play hashtag.
Play is enough. We need a bumper sticker that just says play is enough.
No, we don't. We need people who believe it, who
We
actually
do.
put it into
Well,
practice.
okay. And so by saying play is enough, you're also saying you are enough,
Mhm.
which I was so like these affirmations and things. And like, if you go to like this restaurant cafe gratitude, and they make you order your food, they're like the food isn't named like, salad. It's like grateful. And you have to order it by saying, I am grateful.
Oh, Lord.
And I hated it, but at the same time, thinking about I am enough or you are enough. And you as a child, you are not a future adult.
Mhm.
You are enough as you are in this moment. And that for me and other play workers at the Children's Museum, it's had this profound psychological effect on us. Right. And I mean, I still, again,
How
right,
could it not?
right. To think that I am enough. Right. And so to make that work, you do need to have, I was their manager. So if I'd walk through and I'd see them sitting on the floor with their back against the wall, their legs stretched out and just watching,
Mhm.
great. If I saw them sketching in a notebook,
Mhm.
I would look around. I think there's a reason they're doing that because sometimes that gives a cover for a kid to come up and be like, what are you drawing?
Mhm.
Right? The what you doing moment. And so the trust, it's a level of trust that I hadn't seen. So I think to be able to trust them and think, okay, oh, at the beginning, they some of the museum guides were doing things like they wanted to do installations. I said, well, think about what's missing from the environment for play, and now think about how you might be able to add that in. But they were making beautiful things that were more about them. And so at one point, I said, we have to take this down. This isn't right, which is probably why they all quit. But figuring out those moments where do you intervene and where do you don't? Because so that's, as people who do play work, we're play workers for the play workers.
Mhm.
Stuart Lester, I think of him as such a play. Like I did a master's program where I was working at Boston Children's Museum, and then I transitioned to the New Children's Museum. So huge job change, and I was struggling to keep up with it. But he just saw me, and he's like, "Where are you? I'm going to meet you where you are," and that was transformative for me. So he mentored me and Wendy Russell as well when I was doing my thesis, so that I can take that trust and transfer it on to others.
Mhm.
These
That
tiny little,
empowers them. That empowers them and
yeah,
makes them recognize how you value them and trust them.
yeah.
So, Megan, can you describe? I love the place that you stopped restricting the number of children that went in. What
Mhm.
is another exhibit
Mm.
that you could describe to us where the play workers or your museum staff are able to facilitate or just be present?
Mm. The Wonder Sound.
So talk to us about that.
It's an installation that we created with Wes Bruce, artist Wes Bruce, and then 6 community centers. And we did workshops in the community where we were trying to just kind of understand what's needed and what are the stories we wanted to tell. So the result, and there's a beautiful documentary by Brian Bangerter, which we can maybe link to, called The Wonder
Mhm.
Sound of World Unfolding. It's free. You can find it online about this project. But the result is that it's multiple story, 3-story kind of fort structure.
Mhm.
And the play worker rarely goes into the structure. The play worker is often standing in one place that we deliberately designed for speakerphone, yeah. Yeah, where they lean and that they talk to the adults, because it's a space where kids can disappear. I mean, kids spend 2-3 hours in a space that's, what's the floor space? The floor space is like 1,200 square feet. And they meet each other and they negotiate. We did some formal evaluation where we put GoPros on kids, because you can't really observe all these different spaces. So they wear these like, they're called junior chesties. It's such a weird, doesn't sound like a training bra. Junior chesty.
I'm like, what?
Yeah, but they're wearing these harnesses with their GoPro here. And the things that we saw were beautiful. Like one kid, so they're in one of the spaces, there's these this very thick plexi squares, so you can see down to the ground. And a kid was going up and he'd go, oh, I don't know. And self-talk, he was talking to himself he was worried that it wasn't stable or that he was going to fall through. And so you'd see taking these risks and testing little things, helping each other. There was a toddler who'd come up, which is really tricky, because all the Children's Museum has made me rethink all of my, oh, well, they won't have the upper body strength to crawl. No, they do. They're up on top. And so this toddler was having difficulty getting down, because, like a ladder, you design a space and it should be as easy to get up as it is to get down, right? But the toddler was having difficulty coming down, and a group of Girl Scouts were in there, and the Girl Scouts all helped this little, and they just, come on, okay. And they were teaching them how to get down. If there had been an adult present, the adult would have been, let me show you how, let me get, right? So the girls learned helping. The toddler learned being helped, but they were also teaching the toddler, okay,
how,
right? And so for me, that's a perfect example of play work, because there's no play worker directly involved. Right? We created a space with the affordances for all of this. And Wes Bruce is brilliant. You can look up his work. He's, he and I were just mind meld through this process. It was right after we'd introduced Playwork. And so the play worker is on the outskirts. The play worker is saying, when the adult is like, where's Caden? Where's Caden? And is really freaking out, is really empathetic to that situation, because he or she doesn't know where Caden is, right? And they can say, hey, here's one place where I think you might be able to find your child. Let's take a look over here. Not like, this happens all the time, kids are constantly lost, but like, oh, time for how many kids, because usually they're in the space and they're usually engaged in something. And so and we also built in these little viewpoints, so we knew that we could go and like, let's take a peek through here. And you can peek through this thing, and then you can see into the space where then they can see their child engaging. I don't like to use these terms, but I haven't found a better one, but in the wild. Because we rarely see our own children in the wild. We see them in places where maybe they're trying to please us, or they're trying to be the good children, or whatever it is that we've kind of set up implicitly. So being able to see your child engage with other kids that they don't know.
That's reminding me of, I think it's the playground in New York City, where the adults are not allowed.
Yes.
And so they stand around looking like they're in a cave, like, and I love that.
I love that. I love that, because, sometimes we interfere
too much
instead of be present, right?
And that allows you as an adult to hopefully be present and talk to other grownups, right? Because children's museums, and I think Playground and other spaces like that, where they have designated parent areas. Eurekaville is the same way. Most of the playgrounds that I've gone to in the UK, Chris Martin is another play worker who runs a playground where they have this beautiful little landing space, right? Picnic tables, it's very inviting. And then the kids go into the rest of the space. So they're adjacent, right? They're close. So that's an element, a very simple element of design, where you create a comfortable place for adults to be, where they can separate out. But I think the play worker is really essential in those moments, because they also just chatting. I mean, the things that people have said to us in the Wonder Sound, like Lisa, you're talking about the intersection between art therapy. It's just this moment of, okay, they just need somebody to talk to. I mean, we've had situations where people have told us things that are not okay in their lives. And so we have to think about, how do we act as, we're not social workers, but how do we push people towards the resources that they might need? Is this a cry for help, or is it just wanting to chat, or, so I just think there's something about that space in particular. We're developing a new project called El Más Allá, which means beyond in Spanish, kind of like the great beyond. The artist's name is Panca, and we've been thinking a lot about these aspects of how do you create a space where people can explore the emotions of the past few years, wanting to be somewhere else, wanting things to be different, but also knowing that this is how things are. And so just where are those spaces that we can build in where caregivers can engage with each other, right? As much as they are, our main idea is to respect, we want to respect the caregiver and their caregiver's chosen role. So sometimes we have a lot of parents who are coming on their visitation times. Their goal, they want to have one-on-one time
with their child.
Yeah. They don't want somebody else to intervene. The kid wants to have one-on-one time. They want to be on their own. Sometimes there's one family who would come when we were open. We're still closed. But when we were open, they would come every day. And their kids had relationships with our play workers, to the point that I visited the museum the other day for something, and they were walking on the sidewalk. They live in the neighborhood, and she waved me down. I was on my bicycle, and she's like, wait. And I was like, oh, hi. And the kids didn't know me. I know these kids. I've known them since they were really little. But she said, how are Hannah and Arthur?
Oh,
Workers. And she said to the kids, remember Hannah and Arthur? And then suddenly they were really interested, because these are people that they were engaged with daily. And so I think about that in terms of responsibilities of children's museums, in terms of paying people appropriately so they can have durational time, they can be at the museum for 2-3 years and develop these relationships. We created full-time positions for play workers with benefits, and we're still not there in terms of pay, but I think that's central, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Relationship.
So Megan, we don't want to leave, but it's time. We have to, because Aiden's waiting in the waiting room.
Light is coming here. Let's see.
Oh, hi Aiden. We're coming. I want to wrap us up for in just a second, but when I stop the recording, stay on for just a second, because I do want to get the information on the Wonder Sound, so I can put it with the Porch Play Chat. So for more information on the Porch Play Chats, make sure, or even to join IPA-USA and help us with this work, please visit our website at IPA-USA.org. And until then, thanks for listening and keep on playing.